On behalf of the Diversity Committee of the Connecticut ACP, we would like to welcome you to this very special event that we have put together as a Diversity Storytelling Hour. Before we start, I wanted to talk a little bit about what we do as the Diversity Committee, and I'll be taking a little bit of a cue from our committee chair, Dr. Nasima Merchant, who has facilitated us this slide so that you can learn a little bit more about what we do as a group. So our mission in the Diversity Committee is to use effective strategies to assure the integration of diversity and inclusion in our chapter, and to be responsive to any changes in the environment and demographics of our increasingly diverse community and membership in our state. By using these strategies, we want to make sure that we enhance the professional development and fostering of a diverse environment to practice, both in our chapter activities as well as in our day-to-day work. And we want to engage our members to be a part of this discussion, because we know that makes our overall experience even better. So as I mentioned before, our chair is Dr. Nasima Merchant, and we have three collaborators, three members. You will see in the pictures that we have Dr. Sujata Prasad, who will be co-hosting this event. We have Amir Mohammed, who is also part of our group, and myself included, Enrique Pacheco. So just so that you know, this is not the first event that we have put together. We have done things in the past, including three very special events for us last year. One that was related to visa information for those who require additional support, where we had attorneys answering some of the questions of our members. We had also a hospice and palliative care event, so we can expand on things that are important, especially for our diverse community of patients. And as well, we had a very nice special initiative last year where we got together with people all over the state in a very family-friendly event through a picnic done at Hammonasset State Park. We're planning on doing that event again this year, but of course the pandemic happened, and then we had to transition most of our events, or all of our events, online. So for 2021, and of course pending the what happens with the pandemic, we'll have more activities, including repeating some of our events from the past. We'll have a networking event that we're planning for a spring or maybe late 2021, depending on how things are. We're also having more topics, including a financial planning event, because we know that's also important for our membership. And we'll try to repeat our picnic somewhere in the future. So stay tuned, and we certainly look forward to seeing you. So if you want to get involved with us, you can always contact us. You'll have our emails there. We're more than happy to answer any questions. And without any more taking any more of your time, I want to hand it off to Dr. Sujata Prasad so that she can briefly introduce you what our event from today is. I look forward to seeing you all, and thank you for being a part of this.
Thank you, Enrique. I'm an internist in the community and fellow of the American College of Physicians, assistant professor at Yale in the volunteer faculty. I've grown up in many countries, including India, Italy, Malaysia, Ireland, Canada, USA, and I've been fortunate to embrace many cultures. In addition, I've had the opportunity to study medicine, teach medical students and residents, serve population both in Connecticut as well as in the slums of India, where I go 3 times a year. As a result of this, I've been able to witness many different conditions and lives. Near my home is an independent bookstore, RJ Julia, where I joined the Voices of the Bookstore about 5 years ago. Once a month, both famous and aspiring authors recited stories from every social strata and walks of life. Some of these stories were sobering, some were humorous, some were romantic, some just thoughts, some poetry, bringing voices to a different light. And I thought this would be an ideal idea to bring to the ACP. I think if you go back to storytelling, storytelling is one of the greatest arts practiced throughout the world. Many doctors have been writers, starting with Hippocrates. He was a Greek physician, scholar, and writer who gave us the Hippocrates Oath, which we recite when we finish medical school. There have been many famous authors, next slide, who've also been doctors. And we know Sir Arthur Doyle, who's written Sherlock Holmes, William Somerset Maugham, the poet John Keats, William Osler, Anton Chekhov, a playwright and writer. And in recent times, we have Khaled Hosseini, who wrote The Kite Runner. He depicted stories about Afghanistan and the war. Abraham Verghese, Cutting for Stone. Vincent Lam, who wrote Bloodletting and Miracles Cures about his Chinese population. Siddhartha Mukherjee, who wrote about cancer in The Emperor of All Maladies. Paul Kalanithi, he was actually a Yale graduate who had developed cancer, and he described his thoughts and feelings about his cancer before he died. And When Breath Becomes Theirs was his book. Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist who was in the camps of Auschwitz. His famous book, In Man's Search of Meaning, is well known, and again, very one of the national booksellers. Nawal Iswadi, she was an Egyptian physician. She wrote on Women at Point Zero. Han Suin, a Chinese author during the time of Mao. So these are people, physicians and authors who have become national and international celebrities, booksellers, but they also have continued to be activists in their various fields. Many of our leading journals, including the Annals of Internal Medicine, JAMA, which celebrated its 100th year of storytelling, New England Journal, Lancet, and many other journals have storytelling in sections, and including newspapers such as New York Times and Washington Post. So all these authors have reflected how the picture and lives of migrants, wars, camps, feelings, race, culture struggles. And I think physicians are very privileged to hear and listen, not only about themselves, but other stories about people. Just as a seed which grows into a tree, I hope storytelling will go into an ACP medical culture. By writing, we can give a meaning to a multitude of emotions, bringing empathy and compassion into a complex world. As you will see, we have many talented writers in our own community, and as each of them recite their story, you'll see each one is unique and will be transported into the experience. So I'm going to start with Dr. Ruth Weisberger. She's the program director at Yale Waterbury Internal Medicine Program. She's also a novelist who wrote The Cure to Remembering. I'm going to hand over the podium to her to describe a little bit about herself, why she wrote the story she wrote, and describe the story itself. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you very much, Dr. Prasad. I entered the Diversity Story Hour competition because I saw it as an opportunity to write about the experience of women in medicine. And my story is titled, She. She'll have to drop out. We all thought so, not just the 98 men in the class, but the 10 women also. We weren't sure at first. No one had ever done this in our experience. Of course, there was the legend of Dr. O'Shea, professor of pediatrics, only woman on the faculty over 60 in an institution teeming with septuagenarian men. She had done it in medical school, they said. "What will you do, Kathy?" Ursula asked. We sat on the library steps eating lunch the last warm day in October. "About what?" Kathy asked. "You know about what." "I'm doing peds, medicine, then surgery." Kathy bit into her sandwich defiantly. "Peds will be okay," I said. We all nodded. There were 5 of us, half the women in the class of 1980, and we stuck together. "Maybe Dr. O'Shea will be on for peds," Linda suggested. She habitually saw the upside of things or missed the downside, always looking elsewhere in the auditorium when the ancient Dr. Fabricant interspersed his pathology slides with Playboy centerfolds. The rest of us still looked at the screen. "When's surgery?" Ursula asked, counting on her fingers. "Peds 6 weeks, medicine 6 weeks, so February." We gasped. "No way," pronounced Diane. "I'm not allowed to do my surgery rotation," said Kathy. "How did Dr. O do it?" Linda asked. She hid it. She took 1 day off and came back to work the next day. "That won't work for Kathy," Ursula observed. True, Dr. O'Shea was a towering figure, physically as well as symbolically, and Kathy was petite. There was no way. Autumn passed as we progressed through our clerkships. Diane and I traveled to London for an elective at Guy's Hospital. Linda moved out of the apartment she shared with Ursula and in with her boyfriend, one of our classmates. Dr. Fabricant had a hemorrhagic stroke and died. Kathy floated like a blimp through her rotations, airily unaware of the stares and whispers trailing her down hospital corridors. She said, "I have to do it all to learn." Even then, in our 20s, we sensed the whole business about women doing it all was a lie. February came, and Kathy appeared in the OR in bulging scrubs. She immediately encountered Dr. Fishbane, chief of surgery, who told her to go home. Kathy pulled a chair into the corridor and sat while the blue team operated. The next morning, she returned with Schwartz's Principles of Surgery, sat in the same chair, and read. This went on for 4 weeks. Kathy read 30 chapters of Schwartz. Every day, except Wednesdays when he didn't operate, Dr. Fishbane scowled as he passed her, but after a while, he stopped telling her to go home. "Talk to the dean of students," we advised. "I'd rather not," she said. In the 5th week, Dr. Fishbane paused before Kathy and said, "Come." Kathy stood with the residents at the operating table. "What are the borders of Cowlett's triangle?" Dr. Fishbane murmured, peering into the patient's abdomen. "The cystic artery," a resident began. No. Silence in the OR. "The inferior border of the liver superiorly, the common hepatic duct medially, the cystic duct laterally," said Kathy. "Contents?" Dr. Fishbane asked without looking up. Silence. "The lymph node of Lund, and where the cystic artery arises from the right hepatic artery." "Correct. Can you see it? Let her see it." Dr. Fishbane and Kathy left the OR together. "We'll make up for lost time," he was overheard saying. "In other words, you had to know 10 times more than anyone else to get into the OR," Ursula summed it up. Dr. Mason, associate chief, said to Dr. Fishbane, "That medical student who scrubbed in with you, she's a crackerjack." "But she's what?" You can see she's what, Phil?" Dr. Fishbane asked. "Oh, never mind."
Thank you so much, Ruth. That was excellent. Next, I'd like to introduce you, Dr. Caruso. Namaste's story. She's a hematologist oncologist at the Starlings Physician. She's assistant professor at University of Yukon and a board trustee of the Leukemia Society in Hartford. Dr. Grusso, if you would like to tell a little bit about yourself and as well as your story.
Yes, please. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Prasad, and the esteemed members of ACP. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity of sharing a fraction of my past and present. So when Dr. Prasad and other members at one of the sessions, we were discussing how best to present this and to warm up the audience, etc. When they asked me about, just say, why did you want to tell a story? I didn't think much. And even today, looking back at the answer that I gave, still I would like to say that why the story? Because it is such a wonderful way of connecting to other human beings and making them part of your past and present and even future, probably. Having said that, please allow me to share the story that I have picked with few of my wonderful experiences. Namaste. Is it just a token of grateful respect or the bridge connecting the diverse? Coming from the land of unity in diversity, India, where I have done my medical school training before moving to United States of America, I believe that diversity is one of the core values of healthcare. As an oncologist, I treat patients with different kinds of malignancies and from different walks of life and various cultures. The university professor, a mayor's son, VP of a corporate business, single mother who works 2 jobs, a single mother on disability, my lovely Albanian patient, my adorable Nepalese patient, all have given me the utmost privilege of serving their healthcare needs. I started my med school in 1993 and served as an intern in India in 1998. One night of my casualty posting, which is equivalent to the emergency room posting, there was this case of cobra poisoning. The senior postgraduate gave me the instructions and moved on to attend to the next emergency. My responsibility was to insert the intravenous line, following the protocol of dose calculation and injecting the antivenom. The anxious family was watching me do the required and asked me questions about prognosis and what to expect later. After my shift was done, I handed over the patient care to my relieving team of interns. As per protocol, the patient would be shifted to the medicine ward for further monitoring. A couple of days later, when I was at the local shopping center, I was stopped by someone calling me Dr. Amma, Namaste, which is Dr. Madam, greetings. To my surprise, they were the same family of the cobra bite patient with their hands folded in respect, thanking me for all the life-saving measures I did to save their family member. The relieved family was waiting to catch a bus to go to the famous local deity at the temple to offer prayers thanking God. They thanked me profoundly and equated me to God. I can still remember to date the plethora of emotions I went through. Embarrassment, elation, and kind of unbelief that with my simple following the manual and giving treatment, I made this kind of impact on a family. Even more than 2 decades after that incident, I inadvertently remember the family and their words several times. My stage 4 lung cancer patient was not interested in treatment, thinking stage 4 is an immediate death sentence. She later changed her mind and agreed for treatment when I explained her about the EGFR mutation she has in her tumor, which means with target therapy, she has a good chance of survival advantage over the standard chemotherapy treatments. She's close to 4 years now into diagnosis of her stage 4 lung CA and doing relatively well. Every visit, she greets me with her folded hands, a namaste, and a $1 million smile. Every quarterly scan, when I tell her the disease is stable and she wishes me and my family well, I go back my memory lane and remember the snakebite recovered family members. The pastor husband of my dear African American patient battling her last stages of cancer always greets me with his namaste. As a pastor, he felt the way to respectfully communicate with his wife's oncologist was to greet her in her culture. Through the above and thousands of other patients whom I had the honor of taking care of, the diverse backgrounds they come from, the different battles each is fighting, the diverse complicated diseases they have, the one unifying thing that we all have in common is the respect for each other's diversity. To my patients, a pair of their folded hands is a sign of respect and thanks towards me, an elegantly simple namaste. But to me, this namaste is also a reminder of why I became and continue to be a doctor. Namaste.
Thank you, Madhvi. Namaste. The next slide. The next presenter and she's a Uju Mohammed. She's a 4th-year medical student at University of Connecticut. She's a wonderful writer, as you'll see. She's aspiring to become an anesthesiologist. And I will have her continue and talk a little bit about herself and why she wrote the story she has written and recite her story. Thank you. Would you?
Thank you, Dr. Prasad, and thank you everyone for having me here today. My name is Uju Moma, and I am a 4th-year medical student at the University of Connecticut School of Medicine. In 2015, I graduated from Amherst College, where I received a degree in biology, as well as a certificate in culture, health, and science. And for me, studying the liberal arts really nurtured my interest in both the sciences, but also in the medical humanities. I think they're so important. And I hope to incorporate both of those things into my career. Before starting, I just wanted to share a brief but pertinent quote from one of my favorite authors, Chimamanda Adichie. The quote is, "Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity." So I will now share my patient story from working in a medical clinic in Nigeria. The shuffling sandals slapping against the dry dirt floor, the frenetic pacing of patients being herded between rooms, in the anticipation of any new medical mystery walking through the door. I loved it all. The chance to learn from the seasoned doctors and nurses, combined with the opportunity to meet new patients, I loved it all. That summer, I was the youngest volunteer in my grandfather's general medicine clinic in Nigeria, and I was both eager and anxious to meet new people in my parents' native land. There, I met Amaka, a tall, timid-looking girl with braid self. Her slightly hunched and unrelaxed shoulders revealed her anxiety about being there in the clinic. Her face sat angled towards the floor, and when she occasionally directed eyes upwards, they were unfailingly filled with skepticism and suspicion for those around her. As she continually peered around the room, we eventually met gazes. Immediately, she averted her eyes. Unassuming at first glance, I imagined that she could not have been much older than me, 14 at the time. We were similar, both of Igbo heritage, and our families were from the same village in Igbo land. However, we were also different, for Amaka was pregnant. Admittedly, I had apprehensions on meeting her. Perhaps it was the product of being sheltered, as I'd never met anyone so young and pregnant. As a young girl who could barely manage the normal stressors of just being a teenager, I could not imagine the added weight of also being pregnant. However, my fears were mitigated by my curiosity about her story. Our similarities comforted me, but our differences actually intrigued me. Seeing her as a potential friend among many adults, I approached her with gloves and an arm cuff in hand, prepared to take her blood pressure. While cleaning her arm, I asked Amaka what brought her to the clinic that day, imagining it was for an early pregnancy visit. She responded very briefly. Initially reserved, she seemed unreceptive to my questions. Her neutral facial expressions made me wonder if she didn't understand my accent. Her silence steadily struck my ears like a blaring alarm that could not be shut off. Her stares clung heavily to my person like an unrelenting lint that could not be wiped away. The conglomerate of her unfriendly mannerisms could easily have been mistaken for indifference, an oversight I initially made. I soon learned, however, that if I wanted to have anything more than a one-sided conversation and actually engage with her, I would need to share about myself. Admittedly frustrated, I went home with my grandfather that night, reflecting on what I could have said differently or asked to encourage conversation. Should I have probed more? Would that have made her more uncomfortable? Would she have said more? Knowing that she would be back in the next week, I pondered these questions for the next several days. When Amaka eventually returned to the clinic, I was ready to give it another try. Soon I found ways to break the ice by talking about my favorite Nollywood film or most recent teenage insecurity. Initially feeling English, my anxieties were mitigated by her occasional smirk, chuckle, or smile in response to my jokes. Eventually, her apprehension towards me faded, and my monologue transformed into a dialogue. Over the next several weeks, we grew trusting of each other. She confided in me, and I in her. Quickly, I learned about her estranged family over 3 hours away, her goals of becoming a fashion designer in Lagos, and ultimately why she was pregnant. She was raped. Ostracized by her immediate family and devoid of financial resources, she moved in with a distant cousin. Now 7 months pregnant, she dropped out of school and put her dreams of becoming a designer on hold so she could work as a housemaid to support herself. Strong in the midst of adversity, Amaka had assumed agency over her situation and had a conviction to rise above her circumstances. I quickly recognized that Amaka was more complex than I initially appreciated. What I mistook for passiveness was actually a quiet strength. The unintended consequence of ascribing a single story to Amaka was that it assumed she lacked power, did not allow room for resiliency, and made one perception the definitive one. It disregarded her determination to overcome her circumstances. In that moment, I was tangibly confronted with the notion that had I been a clinician who resigned Amaka to a stereotype, I could have compromised her care. Had we not built a mutual trust wherein she felt comfortable enough to share her story with me, I could have overlooked information crucial to her health. Thus, my experience with Amaka reified how imperative it is to have an unbiased approach in medicine. Hearing her story brought urgency to grasping the deeper dimensions of Amaka and helped me realize the danger of a monolithic narrative when it comes to understanding our fellow human. When we ascribe a single story to our patients, we overlook the complexities and nuances, both of which heavily inform their health. However, as a physician, it is incumbent upon us to foster humanity in our patients, reflect on their stories, and decipher how they play a role in their well-being. On subsequent trips to Nigeria, I've seen Amaka and her son Ikenna, now 10. I'm reminded of our first encounter, ripe with vulnerability and resiliency. My connection to her is one of my greatest motivators. As a fourth-year medical student, Amaka aspires the type of physician I will soon become, grounded in sound clinical judgment and guided by the experiential insights of my patients. As a doctor, I want to walk the path with those whom I serve and better understand the depths of the human condition. I believe that the healing power of medicine comes from the interpersonal relationships we form with our patients, like my experience with Amaka. Most importantly, however, she taught me that when you share knowledge, that when talking, you share knowledge, but when listening, you venture into the consciousness of someone else and you learn something new. Thank you.
Thank you, Uju. That's really nice. The next presenter is, next slide, is People Like Us by Faith Okufu. She's a Yale medical student who's the first Nigerian born in the Bronx and has lived amongst a diverse environment and community. I'm going to give over the podium to Faith, which will describe a little bit about herself and why she wrote the story. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Faith Okifo, and I'm a third-year medical student currently enrolled at Yale School of Medicine. So as Dr. Prasad was talking about, I'm a first-generation Nigerian American from Bronx, New York, and I like to think that my background informs my empathy and understanding of patients from intersectional backgrounds. Additionally, I love to write. I've been writing since I was younger. I do think there's a connection between writing and medicine and that they're both concerned with questions of humanity. And I participated in this event because I believe that writing is also another way to humanize patients from diverse backgrounds. So I will share with you my story. People like us. You have an accent. I think I've heard it before. Perhaps on a bus in the Bronx, speaking quietly to a young brown boy, urging him to sit still as we weave through the city traffic. It sounds musical, like the bells that chime when you push open the door of a corner store bodega, seeking the warmth of a crisp bagel wrapped in gleaming foil, and sometimes getting el dolce pressed into your hands by the kind owner. Or perhaps I've heard it in the African store, as the West African woman in colorful wrappers with brown skin like Sahara sand bartered down the smoked fish and tilapia. The melody is undulating, like the Niger River rising and falling around the swimmers who dry off on the blazing African sand, cooling down with coconut water sipped from the rim of the divided fruit. I have to ask, right then, just as the nurse exits after jotting your vital signs down. Where are you from? I wonder, stepping into the room. The islands, you say. Jamaica. And you? You have an accent. Nigerian, from the Bronx, I reply, taking a seat. That explains it, you decide, sitting straighter. You smile familiarly. I watch as the tension dissipates from your shoulders as you finally relax. I smile back reflexively. People like us, we seem to say, with the curve of our lips and gleaming eyes, find each other. Earlier, you had mentioned that you were anxious about the medications. Why? What remedies do you use at home? Do you grind brittle leaves into potent peppermint paste to rub into your aching chest? Or perhaps the wizened hands of an elder, their skin dry as it grazes yours, push steaming cups into your hands as they urge you to drink in their native tongue. Who is your God? And do you call to them at night in your breathlessness? Do you clutch pearls or turn your face to Mecca as you gasp your uncertainty? You're just afraid. I understand. Your knees ache, and at the end of your custodial shift, you rub them vigorously in admonition. You must stand, not only for the wide-eyed children who scrape their elbows along the narrow, cracked pavement between your cramped brownstone and the next, but for the thin children withering away in the Caribbean heat, relying on your meager support for their livelihood. The prescription pills, cut smaller to last, swallowed in your few minutes of rest at night, seem as negligible as dust in a crumbling home. I know you. People like you, weary, with ever-piling burdens, in a world that rebuffs you, rarely take their blood pressure at home. You can feel it at night, in the heat of your skin as the blankets cling to you. It wanders with your thoughts, drifting to distant places. Yet a familiar hand on your shoulder brings you back. A smile calms you. You start to talk about how you've traded your canned Hunt's tomatoes for fresh ones, and you've cut back on Goya seasonings. And for people like us, whose spicy, savory soups are the centerpieces of our tables, that is effort. This is my favorite part, watching you come alive, more than a medical note, empowered by our shared identities. You speak freely now as the medical interview begins.
Thank you, Faith. That was really beautiful. So I'd like to end by a quote, and if you've seen many of the different writers, and this is a quote from Viktor Frankl, who was in the camps of Auschwitz. For the meaning of life differs from person to person, from day to day, from hour to hour. What matters, therefore, is not the meaning of in general, but the specific meaning of a person's life at the given moment. And I think it's very important that we continue writing, express our stories, and continue. But now I'd like also want to thank all these everybody who has been able to help us put this together. Our governor, Dr. Rebecca Andrews, and my colleagues, Dr. Nasima Merchant, Dr. Enrique Pancheo, Dr. Miriam Ahmad. We spent hours doing putting this program together. And then definitely the judges who picked the stories. Dr. Lisa Saunders, she's an associate professor at Yale. She's also the New York Times liaison for medical stories. Dr. Benjamin Doolittle, he's a professor and program director for the internal medicine and pediatric program at Yale. He's an author himself. Dr. Robert Nardino, who is the program director at UConn in internal medicine, and all the storytellers who have actually given their beautiful stories, their thoughts, and it's just wonderful to listen. Dr. Ruth Weisberger, Dr. Madhvi Gorsel, Uju Mama, and Faith Okuwu, and listeners like you. I want to thank everybody for being able to come and listen and also share the stories. I hope this continues to be a recurring event and to actually gather momentum throughout to the medical community. I think through our stories, we can actually give more empathy, we can give compassion and understand diversity. And we are actually very privileged not only to tell our stories, but also see stories of other people as well. Thank you very much.